Daniel Reyes had exactly $14 in his wallet, a 6-year-old daughter, asleep in the back seat of a borrowed car, and no idea that in 9 days he would be introduced to 300 of the most powerful people in the city as the fiancé of a woman he had spoken to exactly once. If you've ever felt invisible in a room full of people who mattered, stay until the end of this video, because what happened to Daniel will remind you that the life you're quietly building in the dark can still be seen. Before we go further, if stories like this move you, tap that like button and subscribe, because there's a lot more where this came from. It started on a Tuesday morning that smelled like rain and burnt coffee. Daniel worked as a building maintenance technician for Hale Tower, a glass spire in the financial district that housed, among other things, the headquarters of Solvane Technologies, a company most people in the city knew only from billboards. He had worked there for 3 years, ever since his wife Marisol passed away from an aggressive form of cancer that took 11 months to do what nothing else in his life ever could: take away his sense that things would be okay. Since then, it had been just him and Lily, his daughter, a small girl with wild auburn curls and a habit of narrating everything she saw as though she were hosting her own nature documentary. Daniel's job was not glamorous. He fixed leaking pipes, replaced flickering light panels, and once spent 4 hours removing a family of pigeons from an air duct on the 31st floor. He wore a gray uniform jacket, with his name stitched crookedly over the breast pocket, courtesy of Lily, who had insisted on doing it herself, with a sewing kit from a craft store. He didn't mind the stares he sometimes got in the elevator, the way people in tailored suits would glance at his tool belt, and then look away, as if his presence reminded them of something they'd rather not think about. He had bigger worries. Lily's school tuition assistance was expiring at the end of the semester, and the apartment they rented above a laundromat had a landlord who raised the rent every March, like clockwork. Most nights, after Lily fell asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a stack of bills he reorganized, more out of habit than hope, as if rearranging the order might change the total at the bottom. He had a system. Rent first, then Lily's school fees, then groceries, then whatever was left went into a coffee can labeled "Someday" that rarely had more than a few crumpled bills in it. He wasn't ashamed of the work he did. He took pride in fixing things properly, in leaving a job better than he found it, in the quiet satisfaction of a pipe that no longer dripped, or a light that no longer flickered. What wore on him wasn't the labor. It was the loneliness of doing it all without anyone to hand the weight to, even for an hour, even for a night. Marisol used to be the one who reminded him he was doing enough. Since she'd been gone, he had to remind himself, and some nights the reminder didn't take. The morning everything changed. Daniel was called up to the 40th floor to fix a broken thermostat in the executive suite. He had been in that suite exactly twice before, both times when it was empty, the desk immaculate, the view of the city stretching out like a postcard nobody could afford to buy. This time, the desk was occupied. Victoria Hale looked up when he knocked on the open doorframe. She was 32 years old, though something about the stillness in her eyes made her seem older, the kind of tired that came from board meetings that ran until midnight, and a family name she had spent a decade trying to live up to and outgrow at the same time. Her father had built Solvane from a garage into an empire before he died, and Victoria had been running it for 4 years, mostly alone, mostly unseen by anyone who wasn't asking her for something. "You're here for the thermostat," she said, not a question. "Yes, ma'am. It's reading 68, but the room's an icebox. Give me 10 minutes. She nodded and went back to her laptop, and Daniel expected that to be the whole interaction. He knelt by the wall unit, popped the cover, and began tracing the wiring. It was Lily's drawing, tucked into his jacket pocket and half falling out as he crouched, that changed things. It fluttered to the carpet, a crayon sketch of a house with 3 stick figures holding hands under a sun with too many rays. Victoria picked it up before he noticed it had fallen. "Yours?" she asked, holding it out. My daughters. Sorry. She puts them everywhere. I think I've got about 40 of these in my truck. How old is she? 6. She drew that last week. Says the extra stick figure is her mom, who's not really. She passed away 2 years ago. Lily still draws her in, though. I don't have the heart to say anything about it. Something shifted in Victoria's expression. A crack in the composed exterior she wore like armor. She didn't say she understood, because she didn't, not exactly. But she recognized the particular ache of trying to hold a family together with just your own 2 hands. Her mother had died when Victoria was 8, and her father, brilliant as he was, had never quite figured out how to be both parents at once. So Victoria had learned early to parent herself. She sounds like a good artist, Victoria said finally, handing the drawing back. She thinks she's the next big thing. Told her teacher she's going to have a gallery show by 3rd grade. For the first time in longer than Daniel could remember, Victoria Hale laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her. I like her already. The thermostat took 11 minutes to fix, and in that time they talked more than either of them expected to. Victoria asked what Lily's favorite subject was. Daniel asked, half joking, whether running a tech empire was as exhausting as it looked from the outside. She said it was more exhausting, and that most days, the hardest part wasn't the decisions. It was the loneliness of making them without anyone who wanted to know her, rather than what she could give them. Daniel understood that in a way he didn't say out loud. The loneliness of being needed by everyone and truly known by almost no one. When he packed up his tools to leave, Victoria said, "Thank you, Mr. Reyes," reading his name off the crooked stitching on his jacket. Just Daniel is fine. Daniel, then. She almost smiled. Tell your daughter her drawing is very good. He left the office that day thinking it was a nice moment and nothing more. The kind of small kindness exchanged between 2 strangers who would likely never speak again. He had no reason to believe otherwise. People like Victoria Hale did not remember maintenance workers. They had assistants who remembered things for them. Calendars that filled every hour. Lives that moved in circles. Daniel's would never intersect. He was wrong. 6 days later, Daniel's supervisor called him into the facilities office, looking flustered, in a way Daniel had never seen. Reyes, you get a message from upstairs? Upstairs like the 40th floor upstairs. Upstairs like Ms. Hale's personal assistant called facilities directly. She's requesting you specifically for a job at her residence this weekend. Some kind of party setup. Sound system. Lighting rig for the terrace. Paid separately. Off the books. Cash bonus on top of your hours. You know her? I fixed her thermostat. His supervisor stared at him like he'd said something absurd, which, given how these things usually worked, he supposed he had. The job on Saturday was straightforward enough. Wiring string lights and a portable sound system for what Daniel assumed was a small gathering on Victoria's rooftop terrace. He arrived with his tool bag at 9 a.m., expecting to be in and out within a few hours, invisible as always, another vendor moving through the background of somebody else's important day. Instead, Victoria met him at the elevator herself, dressed down in jeans and a sweater, looking almost like a different person than the one behind the glass desk. You didn't have to request me specifically, Daniel said, as they walked toward the terrace. I'm sure your building has an entire crew for this. I know. I wanted you. She caught the surprise on his face and clarified quickly, professionally, as if course-correcting a misstep. You listen. Most people who work for me are so busy managing what I might think of them that they forget to, actually do the job well. You just fix the thermostat and talk to me like a person. It wasn't a declaration of anything, just an honest answer, but it settled somewhere in Daniel's chest anyway. A small, warm stone he hadn't asked for and didn't quite know what to do with. Over the following hour, as he ran cable and tested speakers, they fell into an easy rhythm of conversation again. Victoria asked about Marisol, gently, and Daniel found himself telling her things he hadn't said out loud in months. How Marisol used to sing off-key in the kitchen. How Lily had inherited her mother's stubbornness, down to the exact set of her jaw when she didn't hair. How some nights Daniel sat in his daughter's doorway after she fell asleep, just to remind himself that despite everything, he had built something worth protecting. "You didn't just survive it," Victoria said quietly. "You built a whole life out of the wreckage. That's not nothing. Some days it feels like nothing. Some days it feels like everything. That sounds about right for most things that matter," she told him then, more than she meant to. About her own mother, how she died when Victoria was 8. A car accident on an icy road that her father never once spoke about again, as though silence could be its own kind of grief management. Her father had raised her the only way he knew how, by handing her spreadsheets before she was old enough to understand them, by treating affection like a resource to be allocated efficiently rather than felt. She'd inherited the company at 28 when he passed, and with it, an entire boardroom of men who had known her since she was in pigtails, and still couldn't quite bring themselves to take her seriously. "I used to think, if I worked hard enough, someone would finally look at me and see the person, instead of the name on the building," she admitted. "I'm 32 years old, and I still catch myself doing it, trying to earn a kind of attention that was never going to come from spreadsheets." Daniel didn't offer advice, because he sensed she didn't want any. He just said, "For what it's worth, I've talked to you twice now, and neither time did I think about the name on the building." It was a small thing to say, but Victoria went quiet in a way that told him it had landed somewhere real. By the time he finished the job, the sun was dipping low over the skyline, painting the terrace gold, and Victoria walked him back to the elevator instead of letting her assistant do it. At the doors, she hesitated. "My birthday is next Friday," she said. "There's a gala, 300 people, half of them investors, half of them people who only care about my company and couldn't tell you my middle name. I don't suppose—" She stopped herself, looking almost embarrassed, an expression that seemed foreign on her face. "Never mind. It's a ridiculous ask. Try me. Would you and Lily come, not as staff, as my guests?" Daniel blinked. "Ms. Hale, I fix your thermostats. I don't own a suit that isn't 15 years old and 2 sizes too small." "Victoria," she corrected, "and I'll have something sent over. Please. I don't have many people I'd actually want there." He said yes before he'd fully thought it through, the way you sometimes say yes to things that scare you a little, because some part of you already knows you'll regret it more if you say no. The week that followed felt like a fever dream stitched into ordinary days. A tailor showed up at Daniel's apartment on Wednesday, with 3 suits for him to choose from, and a small yellow dress for Lily that made her spin in circles in the living room until she got dizzy. Daniel kept waiting for the catch. The moment someone would call and say there had been a mistake, that a man like him wasn't meant to be in a room like that. The call never came. Friday arrived faster than he was ready for. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Wentworth Hotel, all crystal chandeliers and orchestral music, and the particular hush of old money, trying not to look like it was showing off. Daniel stood near the entrance with Lily's small hand in his, feeling every inch the imposter he believed himself to be, watching men in tuxedos exchange business cards like currency, and women in gowns worth more than his annual salary drift past, without a glance in his direction. Victoria found them within minutes, radiant in deep emerald silk, and for a moment, the noise of the room seemed to fall away. She knelt to Lily's eye level first. "You must be the artist," she said. "I heard about the gallery show." Lily beamed. "3rd grade. It's happening. I believe it." The evening moved in a blur of introductions Daniel barely absorbed. Board members, investors, a senator's aide, a food critic who talked at length about a restaurant Daniel had never heard of and would never be able to afford. He kept close to the edges, unused to the spotlight, more comfortable holding Lily's hand than holding a champagne flute. It was around 10 o'clock, after the dinner service and before the dancing began, that the evening's host, a silver-haired board member named Preston Hale, Victoria's uncle and the company's chairman, took the stage with a microphone and called for everyone's attention. As some of you know, Preston began, his voice smooth with the particular confidence of a man used to commanding rooms. Tonight isn't just Victoria's birthday. The board and I have been anxious for an opportunity to celebrate some good news, and Victoria has finally given us permission to share it. Daniel felt Lily's hand tighten in his, sensing without understanding that something important was about to happen. Across the room, Victoria's eyes found his, and there was something there. Not panic, exactly, but a kind of pleading he didn't yet have the context to interpret. For years, Preston continued, this company, and frankly this family, has worried about Victoria carrying everything alone. Tonight, I am overjoyed to introduce the man who has, in a remarkably short time, become the most important person in her life. He gestured toward Daniel. Please join me in welcoming Victoria's fiancé, Daniel Reyes. The room erupted into applause. Camera flashes went off in a blinding wave. Daniel stood frozen, his mind unable to process the words fast enough to form a response. Lily looking up at him in confusion. 100 strangers turning toward him with expressions ranging from delight to naked calculation. And somewhere in the crowd, a reporter already typing furiously into a phone. Victoria was moving toward him before he could speak, her hand finding his arm, her voice low and urgent beneath the applause. Daniel, I am so sorry. I didn't know he was going to do this. Please, just give me 30 seconds before you say anything. I promise I will explain everything. He wanted to be angry. Some part of him was angry. A hot flush of humiliation rising in his chest at being used as a prop in a story he hadn't agreed to be part of. Worried immediately for Lily, for what this would mean for the fragile new peace he'd built for his daughter after so much loss already. But there was something else in Victoria's face too. Genuine distress. The look of someone who had just watched a carefully guarded piece of her life get stolen and rewritten by someone else. She pulled him gently toward a side hallway, away from the cameras, Lily trailing between them, and once the ballroom doors closed behind them, the composure she wore so well finally cracked. My uncle has been trying to force a merger with Kell Dynamics for 8 months, she said quickly, quietly. The board thinks I'm the word they use is unstable, because I'm single, because I don't have a family narrative that photographs well for shareholders. Preston found out I invited a guest, and he decided, without asking me, that it would solve his optics problem if the story was that I'm engaged. He's been feeding it to the press all week without telling me. I only found out an hour ago, and I didn't know how to warn you without causing a scene before I had a chance to fix it. So I just got announced as your fiancé to 300 people and a room full of reporters, and you found out an hour ago. Yes, and I am so deeply sorry. This isn't who I am, Daniel. I don't operate like my uncle. I would never use you or Lily like that. Her voice cracked slightly on Lily's name. And that, more than anything else, was what convinced him she meant it. Lily tugged his sleeve. Daddy, are we in trouble? Daniel knelt down, forcing calm into his voice for his daughter's sake, even as his own thoughts raced. No, baby, nobody's in trouble. Just a big misunderstanding. Victoria crouched beside them too, meeting Lily's eyes with the same gentleness she'd shown all evening. I promise I'm going to fix this, she told her. I don't like it when grown-ups make messes and don't clean them up. They stood there for a long moment. 3 unlikely people in a marble hallway, the muffled sound of the orchestra restarting behind the doors. Daniel had every reason to walk out, to take Lily home and never think about Hale Tower, or its terrace, or its complicated, tired-eyed CEO again. But he thought about the way Victoria had picked up his daughter's crayon drawing instead of letting it fall, the way she'd asked about Marisol like she actually wanted to know, the way she'd looked at him in that hallway, like his opinion of her mattered more than 300 guests and a board of tours, to directors combined. What do you want to do? He asked. Victoria took a breath. I want to walk back in there and tell the truth. That my uncle made an announcement without my consent, that you are not my fiancé, that you're a man I deeply respect who came here as my friend and my guest, and that if the board can't handle a CEO who doesn't have a made-up love story to sell to shareholders, then the board has a bigger problem than my personal life. I want to do that, but I need to know if you're willing to stand next to me while I do it. Because after tonight, some of these people are going to say ugly things about both of us, and I won't blame you if you'd rather just leave. Daniel looked down at Lily, who was watching Victoria with the wide, evaluating eyes of a 6-year-old, deciding whether an adult could be trusted. Then he looked back at Victoria. I've spent 2 years teaching my daughter that you don't run from hard things just because they're uncomfortable, he said. Feels like a bad time to start setting a different example. Something in Victoria's face broke open with relief, gratitude, maybe something more that neither of them had the language for yet. Thank you, she whispered. They walked back into the ballroom together, and Victoria took the microphone from a startled event coordinator without waiting for permission. The room quieted, expecting a shy confirmation, a blushing acceptance of the narrative Preston had built for her. Instead, Victoria's voice came out clear and unshaken. I want to correct something my uncle said a few minutes ago, she began. And Daniel watched 300 faces shift from delight to confusion in real time. Daniel Reyes is not my fiancé. He is a member of this building's maintenance staff, a widower, a devoted father, and someone I have come to respect enormously in the short time I've known him. He and his daughter are my guests tonight because I asked them to be, not because my board decided my single life was bad for our stock price. A ripple went through the crowd. Preston's face had gone the color of the tablecloths. I have spent 4 years being told that I need a partner, a family photo, a softer image to be taken seriously in rooms like this one, Victoria continued. Tonight I watched my own family try to manufacture that image without my consent, using a man and a little girl who deserve better than to be props in somebody else's press strategy. I won't be doing that again. If this company needs a fictional fiancé to feel secure in my leadership, then this company has a problem that has nothing to do with my relationship status. The applause that followed was slower to start, but louder when it came, led, unexpectedly, by a cluster of younger board members who had grown tired of Preston's old guard maneuvering long before tonight. Daniel stood at Victoria's side through it, Lily's hand in his, feeling something shift in the wars that had nothing to do with money or headlines, and everything to do with watching someone choose honesty over comfort in front of everyone who mattered to her career. The story made the papers the next morning anyway, though not the story Preston had wanted. CEO rejects manufactured engagement. Champions single father's dignity on live stage, ran one headline. Another simply read, the realest thing that happened at a gala this year. Preston resigned from the board within the month, quietly, after several major shareholders indicated they'd rather back a CEO who told the truth under pressure than a chairman who manipulated a private life for optics. What the papers didn't capture, because it happened weeks later, and far from any camera, was Daniel showing up at Hale Tower on an ordinary Tuesday to fix a leaking pipe on the 12th floor, and Victoria taking the stairs down 8 flights just to bring him coffee and ask, with none of the polish of her boardroom voice, whether he'd like to have dinner with her and Lily sometime that wasn't attached to a crisis. He said yes, the way he'd learned to say yes to things that scared him a little, because he was starting to understand that some risks were worth the fear. They did not get engaged that year, or the year after, not because the feeling wasn't real, but because both of them had learned the hard way what happens when love gets announced before it's chuckered, when a private truth gets turned into a public performance before the people living it have had the chance to choose it for themselves. Instead, they built it slowly, on their own terms, in kitchens and school pickup lines and quiet Tuesday dinners, the way real things are usually built, not with a headline, but with time. Lily got her gallery show, technically, 2 years later, when Victoria quietly rented out a small community art space, and filled it with every crayon drawing her daughter had ever made. Family and friends, and half of Hale Tower's maintenance crew in attendance. Daniel standing near the back, in a suit that finally fit, watching his daughter beam under string lights, not so different from the ones he'd once wired onto a terrace for a woman he barely knew. There was a moment that night, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it, when Victoria stood in front of the drawing with the 3 stick figures and the too many rayed sun, the same one that had fallen out of Daniel's pocket on that first ordinary Tuesday. Someone had framed it and hung it near the entrance, and Lily had insisted it stay exactly as it was, mother included, because some things you don't edit out of a story just because they're painful. Victoria studied it for a long time, and when Daniel came to stand beside her, she didn't say anything profound. She just took his hand, the way you take someone's hand when words would only get in the way of what you're actually trying to say. Lily found them there a few minutes later, tugging at both their sleeves at once, insisting they come see the drawing she'd made of the 3 of them. No extra rays needed this time. Just the people who were actually, finally, in the room. Preston sent a card the following Christmas, brief and stiff, the closest thing to an apology his pride would allow. Victoria kept it in a drawer and didn't respond, not out of spite, but because some bridges are better left as reminders of what not to rebuild. The board, restructured under younger leadership, more interested in results than optics, never brought up her personal life again, not because they's grown more enlightened overnight, but because the quarterly numbers under her direction made the question irrelevant. And irrelevance, Victoria had learned, was sometimes the sincerest form of respect a boardroom could offer. Daniel never did leave his job at Hale Tower, not because he had to, but because he liked fixing things, and because some of the best conversations of his life had happened on his knees in front of a broken thermostat. He did, eventually, get a new jacket, the crooked stitching over the breast pocket redone properly, though he asked the tailor to leave it slightly uneven, just enough to remember where it started. Lily, for her part, informed anyone who would listen that she had, in fact, achieved her gallery show by 3rd grade, exactly as promised, and was now aiming for a museum by age 12, a deadline nobody in the family had the heart to challenge. If there's one thing this story leaves you with, let it be this: the people who see you clearly, who kneel down to pick up what falls instead of stepping over it, who choose the truth even when the easier lie is already halfway out of someone else's mouth. Those are the people worth building a life around, not because they rescue you, but because they refuse to let you be smaller than you are, even in a room full of people who never bothered to look twice. If this story moved you even a little, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories like this one, and tell me in the comments which moment hit you hardest. We'll see you in the next one.